Welcome to Rose Lane, home of Oxford University's Botanic Garden. My name is Simon Hiscock, Professor of Botany and Director of the Botanic Garden and Arboretum. And today, this Oxford Leader event celebrates the rose, the world's favourite and most cultivated ornamental plant that has inspired artists, poets, writers and composers since the time of the ancient Greeks and Chinese. Founded in 1621, Oxford Botanic Garden is the oldest botanic garden in Britain and has a long history of association with the rose. Indeed, Rose Lane was so named in 1772, it was formerly known as Trinity Lane, because of the profusion of roses grown at the garden during the 18th century, interestingly under the leadership of the lazy professor, Humphrey Sibthorpe. Lazy because in his 37 years as Sherardian Professor of Botany, he delivered just one lecture and the whole of botany at Oxford slept. But evidently he, or more likely his gardeners, had a keen liking for roses. More prolific professors followed, including the great plant geneticist Cyril Darlington, who in the 1950s and 60s was intrigued by rose genetics and carried out pioneering research on their complex mating systems, chromosome numbers and evolution in both the wild and under centuries of cultivation. With his garden superintendent, George Robinson, Darlington also established a large collection of diverse species roses, cultivars and hybrids to illustrate how these processes and relationships had influenced the evolution of the modern garden rose. Sadly, this collection no longer exists, but as we approach the garden's 400th anniversary next year, we are recreating elements of this collection to celebrate Darlington's contribution to our understanding of rose genetics and evolution, so we can once again tell the story of the rose.
Sah ein Knab ein Röslein stehen, Röslein auf der Heide, war so jung und morgenschön, lief schnell es nah zu sehen, saß mit vielen Freuden. Röslein, Röslein, Röslein rot, Röslein auf der Heide. Knabe sprach, ich breche dich, Röslein auf der Heide. Röslein sprach, ich steche dich, dass du ewig denkst an mich, und ich will's nicht leiden. Röslein, Röslein, Röslein rot, Röslein auf der Heide. Und der wilde Knabe brach's, Röslein auf der Heide. Röslein wehrte sich und stach, hat ihm durch kein Weh und Arch, musste es ihm leiden. Röslein, Röslein, Röslein rot, Röslein auf der Heide.
We started with what is perhaps one of Schubert's most famous lieder from 1815, Haydn Reinhart. In the first verse, the boy admires the little wild rose. By the later verses, he's decided to pluck it, despite the rose's thorny resistance. Goethe's folksy poem has a brutal underside, which is somewhat belied by the musical repetitions of Schubert's strophic song. It's likely that the Haydn Reinhart is an eglantine or sweetbriar rose, Rosa rubiginosa, which has a strong fragrance but also long, spiny thorns. It's particularly prickly. It's tempting to make a connection between the popularity of Schubert's song and the increasing popularity of wild gardens, featuring sweetbriar in the 19th century, suggesting that Romanticism was reflected in horticulture as much as the arts. Over the centuries, there seems to have been a degree of cross-fertilization between the cultivated arts of songs and roses, Today, we're going to trace a little of that history.
Roses belong to the genus Rosa, part of the Rosaceae family in the order Rosales, and the family includes most of our favourite fruits, such as apples, pears, peaches and strawberries. The genus contains approximately 200 wild species distributed across the continents of the Northern Hemisphere, from North America to China. There are 14 species native to the UK, including the familiar dog rose, Rosa canina, the field rose, Rosa arvensis, and the highly fragrant burnet rose, Rosa pimpinifolia, and the sweet briar, Rosa rubiginosa, the eglantine rose of Shakespeare, with its sweet apple-scented leaves. Like all roses, these native species have complex mating systems involving both sexual and asexual reproduction, leading to complicated patterns of hybridization and variation in chromosome number. These natural processes have created numerous wild variants, many of which were taken into cultivation by man from the earliest times, especially in ancient Greece, the Middle East and China. In Britain, natural variants of our wild roses, especially the eglantine rose, Rosa rubiginosa, have been cultivated since the Middle Ages, and many are still garden favourites today. Other wild roses entered cultivation in Europe, the Mediterranean, Levant and the Middle East, and made their way to Britain in the Middle Ages, including Rosa gallica and Rosa alba from France and wider Europe respectively, and Rosa centifolia, the cabbage rose, and the damask rose, Rosa damaskina, from the Middle East, these two being highly scented and the sources of the fragrant rose oil used in Islamic cultures. Interestingly, neither the red nor the white English roses are native to Britain. The red rose of the House of Lancaster is the French rose, Rosa gallica, and the white rose of the House of York is almost certainly a hybrid between Rosa alba, itself a hybrid, and the damask rose, also a hybrid originating from Syria. These national flowers of England were then hybridized politically by Henry VII to unify the houses of Lancaster and York by creating the heraldic Tudor rose with its 5 white inner petals surrounded by 5 red outer petals. You just can't stop roses hybridizing.
As Simon mentioned, the eglantine, the briar rose of Schubert's Haydn Reinhart, was an emblem of Elizabeth I and celebrated in poems and paintings. By the end of the 17th century, the rose was being cultivated across England and celebrated in poetry for its seductive scent. Henry Purcell's beautiful Sweeter Than Roses, composed as incidental music for Richard Norton's tragedy Pausanias, the Betrayer of His Country, in 1695, in the original play was sung by a courtesan to seduce her patron's protégé.
By the 17th and 18th centuries, there were numerous rose cultivars and hybrids, both of wild and domestic origin, growing in the gardens of Britain and Europe. These are the so-called old garden roses, typically highly scented, but for the main part, flowering only once in the year. In his classic work, Old Garden Roses, published in 1956, Edward Bunyard meticulously describes the main groups of roses grown in Britain and Europe before 1850. This was his cut-off point before the appearance of the modern rose, as typified by the famous La France, released on the world in 1867. These old rose groups include the evocatively named musk, moss, noisette and bourbon, as well as the damasks, gallicas and cabbages, and their myriad cultivars, shrubs, climbers and ramblers. In praise of the old garden roses, Bunyard says, the damask and the cabbage roses take first place on any scale of perfumes, and their vigour, hardiness and freedom from disease put them well ahead of their modern descendants.
The practice of hybridization captured the imagination of poets such as Bjørnstjerne Bjørnson, whose The White and the Red Rose playfully fantasizes about how the flowers might intermarry. Grieg, who set the poem in 1873, might also be thought to be indulging in some hybridization. Like many other composers, he brings together different styles in responding to the folkish and the saucy aspects of Bjørnson's tale. Breeding between species might be an extended metaphor, or an overextended one, for Edward Elgar's Like to the Damask Rose, composed in 1892 after the composer had spent a few weeks in Germany, which had included a trip to Wagner's Festspielhaus in Bayreuth. On his return to Malvern, Elgar composed a number of songs which might have been designed for a ballad market, but stretched beyond the range of many amateurs. Like to the Damask Rose sets 4 of a 6-verse poem by 17th century schoolmaster Simon Wastell. There are religious overtones to the images listed as similes for the impermanence of human life. What is perhaps most surprising about this song is its energy. There are many lovely, languorous songs about roses, but few with this Victorian vigour. A whole other world of roses is evoked in the languid sensuality of Fauré's Les Roses d'Ispahan from 1884. Isfahan, in what is now central Iran, was renowned for its mosques, minarets, palaces, and gardens. Roses are often used as a symbol within Persian architecture. They festoon the domes of the city's mosques, and in secular decoration, the rose and the nightingale signify lover and beloved. Similar imagery percolated to Western Europe through the poetry of Hafiz. Fauré's setting of Leconte de Lisle's poem is sometimes written off as routine French Orientalism, and it is undulating, richly chromatic, and repetitive, as you would expect. What's slightly unusual is the naming of specific places, Isfahan and Mosul, alongside specific flowers, roses, jasmine, and orange blossom. In the end, Fauré's song is both of its time and an effective evocation of an atmosphere, and desire for the mysterious Layla. The rose has been put to symbolic use from ancient times. The Greeks associated the rose with Venus, while in Buddhism, roses paved the way to nirvana. In Hinduism, Vishnu's wife Lakshmi was created by Brahma out of thousands of rose petals. In Muslim hadiths, fragrant roses are said to have sprung from the Prophet's drops of sweat. In Christianity, thornless roses were associated with Mary, evoking her modesty and mystical aspects. The red rose could also stand for the Passion of Christ. In Tchaikovsky's The Crown of Roses, published originally in his Songs for Children in 1883, the red roses young Jesus grew in his garden were picked by Jewish children, leaving him only with the thorns that were made into a crown. Where there should have been red roses were instead drops of blood. Tchaikovsky probably thought the poem was by Plesheyev, who gave it the title Legend, but it was actually a translation of American Henry Richard Stoddard. Tchaikovsky converted the solo song into an orchestral song and then into a choral piece. It was freely translated back into English by Richard Dearmer for the English Carol Book in 1913. Dearmer removed the reference to the children being Jewish and also, for our purposes, changed the way the roses were described. In the Stoddard, they are rare and red, while in the Dearmer, they are small and wild.
During the late 18th and early 19th century, in gardens and nurseries across Europe, new varieties and hybrids were being selected and taken onto the market. But the biggest step change in rose breeding came with the introduction to Europe of the China roses, Rosa chinensis, and its tea rose cultivars. These roses had been grown in gardens in China for thousands of years and were first introduced to European rose growers during the late 18th century as a result of botanical explorations to China. Then, during the 19th century, they were incorporated into breeding programs. The virtue of the China roses was their repeat flowering, meaning that hybrids formed between them and the old roses could combine this desirable trait of repeat flowering with the scent and hardiness of the old roses. These landmark hybrids, often referred to as hybrid teas, are the progenitors of the many forms of the modern rose, Rosa hybrida, usually shrub roses, as you see in garden centres today, which have been created by eminent rose growers like Peter Beals and David Austin. Interestingly, recent genome sequencing of roses by a group in Lyon, France, has shown that modern hybrid roses contain elements of the genomes of variously 8 to 20 old roses and tea hybrids derived from the Rosa chinensis. But of modern roses, circa 1957, Bunyard says, "For scent, we still take the old varieties as standards. The Damask, the centifolia, and the alba are standards toward which modern roses aim. And I do not know any more scented rose than the Rugosa Parfum de Lait, a contralto scent in contrast to the tea's soprano."
There are countless 19th century songs setting poems about cut roses, whose presence in a vase or as part of a corsage conveys a lover's message, and which, of course, on wilting, suggest the fading of their love. Berlioz's setting of Gautier from Les Nuits d'été, The Spectre of the Rose, imagines the ghost of a rose that has died blissfully on the bosom of a young girl at a ball. And there are many other French and Russian examples, from Pauline Viardot's Les Deux Roses to Massenet's La Vie d'une Rose and Cuy La Tombe et la Rose. The example we'll hear today, though, is by German Romantic composer Robert Schumann. He set several poems about roses in his Lieder, not least in the 1840 song cycle Dichterliebe. But this setting of Nikolaus Lenau from 1850, Meine Rosa, is a perfect example of the way the themes of love and death can be conveyed through the symbol of the rose. The protagonist hopes to rejuvenate the cut flower through giving it some water, and would do the same with the rose of their heart. A few years after this song was composed, Robert Schumann entered the asylum at Endenich, where he would die. During his incarceration, his wife Clara, who continued to perform to support their large family, on her travels often picked and dried flowers, noting down what they were, where they came from, and the symbolism of each bloom, as many people did in the 19th century, as messages for their loved ones. It's been reproduced as a facsimile by the Schumann House as a moving testament to their enduring love.
Wasser
Behind me is a fine example of the modern hybrid rose, this one created in 2002, and combining the features of the China rose in terms of repeat flowering and the scented characters of the old roses. And having started flowering in June, this cultivar is still flowering in early autumn. Over the past few years, Oxford Botanic Garden has worked with head rose breeder at Peter Beale's Roses, Ian Limmer, to create a new hybrid rose to celebrate Oxford Botanic Garden's 400th anniversary next year. It is a beautiful pink rose that combines the scent, hardiness and vigour of the old roses with prolific repeat flowering associated with the hybrid teas. For us, the perfect modern rose to celebrate our anniversary. The difficult task now is to find a name for it.
Our final example shows the continued allure of the rose, with Cumbrian-based composer Ella Jarman Pinto's setting of Emily Dickinson's This Little Rose from 2010. Roses are rather like songs. They're enjoyed in the moment, can convey other worlds and states of being, and then they disappear. Thanks to Lauren Lodge-Campbell and Dylan Perez for all the musical examples, and thanks to the Botanic Garden for providing us with such a lovely location in which to film.